Have you been rejected or disappointed time and time again? Well, this man did. Let me tell you about his story. In 1890, a baby boy named Harland David Sanders was born in Henryville, Indiana. He was the oldest of 3 children born to Wilbur David and Margaret Ann Sanders. When Sanders was only 6, his father passed away and he was left to cook for his siblings, while their mother was away at work. In 7th grade, he dropped out of school and left home to go work as a farmhand. This caused him to grow up quickly and become a tough person. When he was 16, Sanders faked his age to join the U.S. Army. After serving in Cuba for a few months, he was honorably discharged. Kentucky Governor Ruby LaFoon issued a ceremonial decree that commissioned Sanders an honorary colonel. After the honorable discharge, Sanders tried many things. He was a laborer at a railway, but he was fired after getting into a fight with a co-worker. While he worked for the railway, he studied law, until he ruined his legal career by getting into another fight. Sanders was forced to move back in with his mom and get a job selling life insurance. But guess what? He got fired for insubordination. But this guy wouldn't give up. In 1920, he founded a ferry boat company. Later, he tried cashing in his ferry boat business to create a lamp manufacturing company, only to find out that another company already sold a better version of his lamp. Poor guy couldn't catch a break. At age 40 he began selling chicken dishes in a service station. The start of the KFC franchise can be traced back to Sanders feeding travelers at a service station in Corbin, Kentucky, in 1930. After the success of his country ham and steak dinners, he opened Sanders Cafe and began to serve chicken fried in an iron skillet. This eventually led to the KFC we know today. By this time, Sanders had begun to perfect the recipe for chicken, which is still closely guarded by KFC today. His winning streak grew even hotter in 1939, when he developed a method of cooking chicken via a pressure cooker which cut down on grease and preserved flavor, moisture, and texture without sacrificing cooking time. For over a decade, Sanders' restaurant prospered, but another bout of tragedy waited on the horizon. In the 50s, Colonel Sanders was struck by 2 blows of bad luck in rapid succession, putting the success he had finally found at great risk. The first came when the highway junction situated in front of his restaurant was moved to another location, effectively putting an end to the busy traffic which regularly passed by, and provided him with customers. That alone would be enough to put a major dent in his business. But next came the announcement of a brand new interstate highway which was to be built on a location which bypassed the restaurant by 7 miles. It became clear that Sanders and his restaurant were about to be left in the dirt. Sensing the end was near, Sanders auctioned off the site of his restaurant in 1956, and he took a loss on the sale. With no income, he was forced to scrape by a living on his savings, the proceeds of the auction, and his Social Security check of $105 per month. After a brief and tantalizing flirtation with success, Colonel Sanders was back to square one. After the closure of his restaurant, Colonel Sanders, now devoted to his cooking, attempted a new business tactic. He traveled across the United States, visiting potential franchisee restaurants and offering them his chicken recipe in return for 4 cents on every chicken sold. He later raised it to a nickel. Sanders' first franchisee was Pete Harmon, a friend in Salt Lake City, who had seen a boom in sales since beginning to serve chicken made with Sanders' method and recipe. Sanders would wander across the country, always on the lookout for suitable restaurants. If he found one, he'd walk inside and try to convince the owner to let him cook some chicken for the restaurant's employees. If they approved, he'd suggest cooking for the restaurant's customers for a few days. The public would then, theoretically, So enjoy this new recipe that the restaurant would enter into negotiations to begin franchising for Sanders. It was a slow, expensive, and humiliating way to pursue business partners, and in the meantime Sanders, and sometimes his wife, lived out of his car and ate begged meals from friends whenever he could. In 1952, the first KFC franchise was awarded to Pete Harmon in Salt Lake City, Utah. Interestingly, Sanders' recipe was rejected 1,009 times before anyone accepted it. By 1964, he had franchised over 600 outlets and built a company worth millions of dollars. Although, at that time there weren't actually any Kentucky Fried Chicken locations, only restaurants that sold their chicken. At the age of 74, Colonel Sanders owned a thriving company with 17 employees, an office, space and a not inconsiderable profit margin. But one day, John E. Brown Jr., a 29-year-old lawyer from Kentucky, with his millionaire patron Jack Massey, set out to convince Sanders to sell his company. The Colonel, at first, firmly declined their offer. Brown and Massey then spent weeks attempting to persuade Sanders into changing his mind. They told him he ought to retire and enjoy life. They swore to never tamper with his recipe, and insisted on the highest degree of quality control for the franchise. In 1964, he gave in to their offer of $2 million. Sanders would receive a down payment of $50,000 in the sale of the company's assets in Canada, and a lifetime salary of $40,000 per year. Colonel Sanders' role in the company wasn't over. Brown believed Sanders faced to be KFC's greatest asset, and instigated a serious publicity campaign to up his nationwide presence. He appeared on television, conducted press interviews, and visited individual restaurants as a spokesperson for the company. In 1971, Brown sold the company to Hugh Bryant Incorporated, and Colonel Sanders became discontented with the direction KFC was taking. The company moved its headquarters to Tennessee, began charging a franchise fee for its outlets, and took a percentage of sales rather than Sanders' preferred rate of a nickel per chicken. Eventually, Sanders chose to open a new restaurant, which he named Colonel Sanders Dinner House. KFC posited that they owned the rights to his name and threatened legal action. He renamed his eatery to the Colonel's Ladies Dinner House, but KFC insisted they owned the rights to the word Colonel. Sanders then decided to sue the company he began, for $122 million. KFC responded by suing him for trademark infringement. They settled in